Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session. And I hope that you've been having an enjoyable PI meeting so far. And I hope that this session will prove to be interesting to you. So before we go to the panelists for their presentations, this particular session I actually found a little daunting. The title is to approaches for equitable community-based empirical researches, and working with rather than for communities. So in thinking about the framing of research around working with rather than for as a potentially new ethical norm for applied research, I found that to be both a compelling question, but also one in which I think has to be unpacked from a lot of levels, because there's the issue of what is ethical. So that definition, because it's almost as if a traditional research and traditional approaches to research have been less than ethical. So the question is, how is ethical being defined in the context of working with communities rather than for? And the whole idea of working for a community also raises questions. When we do something with a community, ostensibly one hopes that the benefits of the research will really have a positive impact on those communities. So with rather than for seems to me maybe something that also needs to be a little more reframed, because the research has to be inclusive of both, is the way I see it. But these are challenging questions. And the question also, for the presenters and group is what has informed the thinking around what is and is not ethical, and what is and is not working with rather than for. So let me just frame this a little further. The way it's looked at is that working with a community means that ultimate control over the research process is shared with communities or audiences. It's done in ways that create ownership or buy-in throughout the research process, and in this way respects the norms and shares power and voice. It also assumes a different relationship between researchers and those who partner in the research. It's underscored that this is different from other approaches to the more traditional, where a community becomes the research subject itself, and there's a distance, a real distance, a palpable distance between the research subjects and that which is being studied. So there's an attempt here in this session to kind of reshape that paradigm so that there is no distance between the researcher and the research. And I think that's a very compelling thing to be thinking about, but I still worry about the ethical contrasting that's going on. So it's who's controlling what and who's doing what for whom seems to be at the core of this. So I'll leave it to the researchers to kind of present what they think about these approaches and framing around the research. So I will let them start off. There's a team that's going to start first.
Chris and Lisa.
Is that Chris?
Yeah, I think it's us. Thank you so much. My name is Chris Hahn. I'm a professor over at UMBC. That's the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I'm here with my Co-I Aaron Goodling. You want to introduce yourself?
Everyone. Yeah, my name's Erin. I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon. I work with Right to Survive, which is a homeless-led activist group here in Portland that's been around for about 10 years or so. And Lisa Fay was scheduled to present. My computer screen is doing funny things. Is everyone seeing me just normally? Okay. Lisa was scheduled to present. She's not able, so Chris and I are gonna tag team this one. We've been working on a project called Resting Safe. And the goal of Resting Safe is to make sure that unhoused communities have access to knowledge and materials to reduce harm from environmental hazards. So things like mold and mildew growing in people's tents and cars, vehicles where they're staying, pests and rodents, air pollution, wildfire, things like that. And in terms of some of the opportunities that we've encountered, and just so everybody knows in the audience, they've said not to give like a deep introduction to our project, so we're just diving right into the opportunities and challenges. One thing that this project has done is it's giving unhoused communities, homeless communities, the ability to have knowledge and information that helps to claim space in cities. And I don't know if people are familiar, but police and different public agencies tend to push unhoused people into really toxic places. We call them sweeps. People get swept into toxic places. And so to be able to have more information about what's in the space around in order to make decisions about whether to locate in one place versus another, whether near a freeway versus you know, in a more green space, there's just like a lot of decisions that go into communities, a lot of factors that go into a community's decision about where to locate. And another opportunity that has come out of this project is it can make science more relevant to ordinary people. I'm sure that's a theme that all of the groups here are familiar with, you know, working with communities, not just for the sake of research, less extractive, not using people, but actually this is a question that came up from Right to Survive, from the needs of folks on the ground. This is a community that Right to Survive started in Portland called Right to Dream 2. Yeah, you can see it's on a gravel lot here in downtown Portland. It's since moved to another space, but this project really came about. If you can see in the top left-hand corner, there's a handful of folks. We were sitting around and we started creating pamphlets that had a lot of information about water pollution and fish toxicity, because a lot of people are living along the river, the Willamette River here in Portland. It's kind of like where this project was born. And I'm gonna turn it over to Chris. We're gonna go back and forth a couple times, but.
Yeah, so in thinking also about opportunities of the project, it really put in and clarified that you don't actually have to be an expert to do science. And so we were able to, one of the hazards that we were looking at was air quality. I'm an ecologist. I looked into, I was just trying to understand more about how to use the tools that I knew to be able to help with environmental justice. And so we started this project called Spidey Sensor, and as a tool to help people to monitor their air quality by collecting spider webs. And so the collection for monitoring air quality is just collecting a little bit of dust outside, and we use the spider webs as our kind of filter, our method for collecting that dust. And so people can participate anywhere. And so that was an opportunity for us and for well, everyone on the team of Resting Safe to really see that, like, actually we have the tools capable around us to be able to give us more information about the environment. And so I'm going to share with you a challenge and an opportunity that we face during this. And so what I'm showing is a clip of when we had folks from Resting Safe come over to learn about how to collect spiderweb samples. And so this is Ibrahim. He has a glass stirring rod, and he's using it to tap on the spider web to kind of alert the spider to go into its little retreat, its little hidey hole. And then he's using what I call the cotton candy method to twirl that spider web and just put it into a vial. And he's using gloves, glass stirring rods that can be sterilized, all these things to make sure that we don't contaminate our samples. And once he sticks it into the vial, then we can use that sample and measure metal contaminants in particular as a metric of air quality. And so this, coming together and talking about this process was really fun and also exciting, because people were really seeing like that just a simple thing like this spider web that we walk around all the time can give us more information about air quality. It also became a challenge because, the stirring rods are really cheap. Acetone is really cheap. All these little pieces, the glass vials, are also like inexpensive. And so I was thinking, yeah, we would send out kits to people to go and collect their spider webs. And but through working with folks at Right to Survive, it was like, oh, we don't even need, what if we just use like plastic straws or paper straws? And so it was really clear that like the methods and structures of the project, even though they were simple, there were still barriers and like added on complexities that weren't necessary. And so it's been both a challenge and an opportunity to kind of negotiate back and forth and really find like those areas that that still hold the integrity of like data collection and simplify things so much. And so that was something that we saw kind of over and over again, because like on our team, we have people that are really good at making do with whatever's around them. And so we've simplified our methods so much that I think will not only help the success of this project, but also make this tool even more broadly applicable. So that's been a really, challenging opportunity.
Yeah, and we have 3 other challenges that we want to briefly highlight. And the first of those is, you see this video here. We've begun to use more videos. We're creating a video that people can access that shows the process of collecting spider webs in order to in order to learn how to do it in their own communities. And I put a link in the chat, but we're creating a series of popular education materials that are like more pamphlet based. It just makes it easier to get the word out there for folks who don't have cell phone access or can't access videos easily. And really this is addressing the challenge of just that STEM topics are really, can be really jargony. There's lots of technical language, and what we found is that people actually really do like learning the technical terms and learning and being really precise with things. But the materials sometimes just need to be made more accessible, or like speak to somebody to draw them in a way that they might not at first glance say like, oh, this STEM topic isn't for me. But with a zine rather than like a really detailed flow chart that can help bring people in. And Chris is gonna speak to our last 2 challenges, which are probably our biggest challenges.
Yeah. One of the challenges is also just like timeline, in that, we wrote this grant in 2019 in another world. And so trying to, when the world changed in 2020, like that, our communities were hit very hard. And so trying to adjust within what was possible in that landscape it is a big challenge and will continue. It also means that some of the timeline and time scale things don't quite line up in terms of when we can have products or what makes sense for somebody's time and capacity in a given moment. And then our last thing is also that just because of the requirements of what we do have to produce, we're trying to make this as a collaborative collaborative and also equitable across our organizations, but really institutions are the ones that have the capacity to be able to fulfill all the demands of funding and just of what we need. And so like our Right to Survive group really doesn't have can't spend all the time and labor of all the behind the scenes stuff to be able to go to all the meetings, do all the application process. There's a lot of logistics that really do require institutions to do them. And so just thinking about how we can reduce that burden while also allowing people to show up, it has been a challenge. Now I'll stop there and look forward to continuing these conversations and listening to the other panelists. So thanks.
Okay, let's have our next panel, please.
Hi, everyone. I think we were on the list for the next panelist. I'm Fawad Hamidi, and I'm going to talk today about our project with my colleague, Andrew Coy. I'm from UMBC too. So Chris, great to see you on the screen. I think we've taken the same shuttle, but it's so nice to know about your project and looking forward to connect afterwards also. So I'm in information systems and at UMBC. And I've been working for a number of years, actually since arriving in Baltimore with Andrew and his organization. And I'll give him a moment to also introduce himself.
Yeah, no, wonderful to be here with all of you. Andrew Coy, Executive Director, Digital Harbor Foundation. We're a community-based nonprofit located right here in Baltimore. And we're located in the former South Baltimore Rec Center and do a number of different programs relating to digital divide and tech. But one of our early and primary projects relates to a tech center where youth come and learn after school, summertime, out of school time experiences, as well as school day, field trip, informal STEM opportunities in the space, things relating to the maker movement, broadly speaking, but a lot of technology, design thinking, digital fabrication, those types of skill sets.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to share a poster. We're not going to go into all the details here, just to kind of give you an overview of the project that we've been working on. So essentially, we're looking to understand the role of informal STEM educators in creating maker-based and community-centered technology and computer science learning hubs for urban youth. The project is called Rec to Tech, and actually this is kind of builds on earlier work that Andrew and I did kind of a pilot with an eager grant from NSF previously, where we worked with 3 local organizations that were wanting to kind of incorporate technology-rich programs into their services that they were providing the communities. And that earlier project provided us with an opportunity to reflect and really think about what are some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in this space of kind of bringing some of the work that Andrew has been doing at DHF into these types of organizations. And a big part of our motivation was to also use this research opportunity as a way to understand how to develop equity-based approaches to making. And I use making in a very broad sense. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of critiques around kind of some of the earlier notions of making, and they could have been excluding a lot of people. So we're very aware of that and kind of wanting to kind of challenge and redefine some of those notions and rewrite them with our community partners. And it's a really interesting kind of perspective because Andrew, and as he mentioned, his nonprofit is our community partner, but we also have another level of community. We're basically collaborating with another set of community partners in these projects, which are spaces that are providing services to youth or would like to provide this type of services to youth, but don't have experience with setting up a technology-rich center, creating these hubs, everything from kind of buying the equipment, kind of developing curriculum, and also educating local community educators. So all of those kind of questions exist and are kind of part of ongoing training and negotiation that we're doing with our partners. And I can go into more details. Maybe Andrew, if you want to talk a little bit about our partners and what is the configuration there.
Yeah, I'll speak to that for a minute, and then also speak to some of the challenges that go along with this and the opportunities. So we're working with Baltimore City Rec and Parks, as well as the Pittsburgh City Parks, to help support educators in those informal spaces. There's multiple rec centers in both Pittsburgh and Baltimore. They'll be developing and implementing these programs. And over the course of the multi-year project, they're going to be localizing a set of experiences where they're provided in the first iteration with a set of materials that we had created here at the Digital Harbor Foundation to help support them in their educator programs. But then over the course of the years, those educators are given time, space, and supports to really think through how it's relevant in their community for their interests, and to then change, modify, create, and develop programs that really speak to what their interests are and how they interpret and see the power of the technology-rich environment. And in that localization process, we're wanting to understand, what does that need to be successful? What are the challenges that faces? And one of the challenges and opportunities that I'll sort of raise up here, is that it does take longer. The project does go slower in terms of implementation. It's some of the questions, even from the partners themselves, some of their initial questions when we were proposing this were, well, can we just contract with you all to come in and do it? And part of the question was, how is it sustainable, right? What does it look like? And in building with, not for, versus for, one of the theories or the thoughts here that we're evaluating and looking at is what is the likelihood that the type of experiences that are developed, created, will persist in those spaces, that these are transformational in terms of the rec centers on an ongoing basis, not just for a specific duration. And so as the rec centers are spending the time to develop out, how their internal systems of hiring, of supporting those folks, of what these spaces and the rec center directors' roles and responsibilities are, it certainly is pushing on that, and we're excited to see where that goes. But a challenge and opportunity is that it does take longer, and maybe the old adage about a slow moving river is usually deeper applies here, where or the, I guess, the adage also of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We're sort of putting some empirical data behind that in various ways.
Yeah, and I would add to what Andrew is saying here, that it's really interesting to see the challenges and the opportunities. There's two sides of the coin. So with the metaphor of the river, kind of I think the opportunities also provide kind of reflect some of the challenges and vice versa. And when we were kind of writing the proposal together, we actually built in a challenge for ourselves as a way to kind of create opportunity. And that was the notion of localization. So kind of keeping some of the ideas open and making room for our partners to kind of critique and provide feedback on every aspect of the program, essentially. But of course, what we could not kind of built in, and this is something that Chris and Erin also mentioned, was that it was a different world when we were writing the proposal. And with COVID, of course, everything, I think it's well known that the pandemic has really kind of underlined a lot of existing, or amplified a lot of existing challenges and inequities that existed before that. And that has also kind of slowed things down and made us, in a positive way, it has made us reflect more on some of those aspects, both in relation to our projects and more broadly, but also kind of has created challenges in a continued sense of not knowing exactly like how things are going to pan out in the short term and the long term. Yeah, but I think that's probably, Andrew, if you want to add anything, any final thoughts, I think that's probably our time slot.
maybe the last thing that I'll say is, Arlene, some of your comments early on about ultimate control and relationship, I really appreciated, and those questions and how to navigate, and not every project, prior to this being a focal point of conversation, obviously was one or the other, was either with or for, and in this moment, it's certainly is something that we are thinking a lot about, and with the history, as Fouad has referenced, about some of the maker movement. Maker as a term is relatively new, but it's describing some of the oldest of things, but in the way that it's describing it more recently in popular sort of language and culture, it certainly has discounted some of the traditional and the history there, and so thinking about that ultimate control and the relationship is really sort of forefront, and so thank you for raising that up.
I believe we're ready for our next speaker, the final group.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Callahan. I'm the Chief Advancement Officer at Urban College of Boston. Thanks to David Sittenfeld from the Boston Museum of Science for inviting me to join today's session. I'm just going to introduce Urban College briefly before passing it over to David. Urban College is a private nonprofit community college that grants associate degrees and certificates. We enroll over 1,000 students annually, many of whom attend college part-time while working full-time and raising a family. Typically over 95% of our students are people of color, over 90% are women, and the average age is 37. UCB offers classes in English, Spanish, Mandarin, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole, so that students can take college credit-bearing courses in their native language while learning English. We were really thrilled to partner with the Museum of Science in the city of Boston on this project, and I'm glad to be a part of this conversation today. So I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And we have just a few slides that we're going to share if we're successful in doing that. Hopefully that worked. Caitlin and I are here representing a project funded by AZEL called Building Capacity for Co-Created Public Engagement with Science. And this is an interesting project because it's national scale. So it has involved 4 communities, each sort of with one science museum participating with civic and community partners. And Caitlin and I will talk a little bit about how that has all worked. But just to give some context to this, my colleagues at the Museum of Science and the other people from the science museums that are participating in the project, and you'll see who they are in just a couple of minutes, focus on creating and implementing deliberative programs that we call forums that we define as sort of facilitated roundtable conversations, and we bring members of a community to bring together to deliberate and make recommendations about topics that lie at the intersection of science and society. So those kinds of topics that you want science at the table, but they cannot be decided without values and personal experience and personal perspectives, because they bring forward issues of social equity and disparities among society. And the idea is that these questions are best decided with a diverse range of perspectives. And what we're going to talk about in this project is ways that teams of civic, community research, and informal science education partners in 4 communities from around the United States have kind of been working to flip the model that we've used previously for working with policymakers or scientists to help select and inform the discussion topics and questions that we choose for deliberation, and instead start with community members and ask them what they find important to bring to the table. So we're going to start by exploring the idea of doing that, and then you'll hear from Caitlin as her experiences as part of one of those 4 teams about what that was like for someone working in a community partner with a science museum and with these other kinds of partners. But I just want to start by saying that I'm really already learning from the inspiring perspectives that we just heard. And I know that there are a lot of people in the audience that have thought very deeply about all of this. And so I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you in the breakouts. So these are kind of the goal that we had for the project, or one way to describe what we were trying to do. We kind of wanted to test out one new model for doing public engagement science to sort of facilitate learning between scientists, public, and scientific institutions that focuses on this idea of co-creation that you've all been talking about, and we heard quite a bit about in the keynote. And basically the idea was to try to increase agency among community members while creating sort of long-standing local partnerships and gathering information about what was important to a community through co-developing community-based forums. And just to give you a sense of the national scope of the project, it's been taking place in 4 communities, and it started in, as we heard about before, the before times of 2018. And the first phase of the project took place in Portland, Oregon, and in Boston. And we're now at the point where partner teams in Detroit and Durham, North Carolina have been adapting the model and applying it in their own communities. For this quick sort of dive, we're going to mostly focus on what's happened in Boston, because that's what Caitlin's been most directly involved in. And we thought it'd be great for you to hear her experiences. But we're going to bring in some examples where we can of the inspiring work that the other teams have been doing as best we can. And I'll bring forward those in the breakouts if I can. And so just to say that the model that we're going to talk about is really very general. The whole idea was to provide an idea and a way for each community to figure out how to inform the evolution of the model based on their needs. And so we're trying to think really hard about how to put forward something that's flexible, but also can help to inform what others in the field, including many of you, are doing. So we're going to focus really quickly on how we got to a topic using the community informed process that we kind of put on a piece of paper. And there's 3 main categories working together in each of these 4 locations. You may have seen them in the map, and I'll show them again at the end if we have time. And they basically consist of a community partner, a civic partner, a research partner, and then you have this informal science education institution that is kind of a facilitator. So in Boston, that was the Museum of Science. And the idea is really that you've got these different groups. The Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics in Boston was our civic partner, as Caitlin mentioned, and the Urban College of Boston, with the amazing work that they're doing with the student that you heard about, was our community partner. And in our case, the civic partner also brought a research perspective. The Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics kind of brings forward the civic research agenda, and that's played out differently across the teams. For example, our partners in Oregon, the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry worked with a group called the Metro Regional Government, as well as a community group called Momentum Alliance that focuses on youth. And they brought in scientists to participate in their conversation and also leaned on the scientific expertise from Metro. And so the big thing we tried to do about this was create a way that during each step of the public participation process, the 3 partner institutions work together to make decisions and have the museum kind of be a facilitator for that. Let me just stop really quickly to see, Caitlin, is there anything you wanted to talk about how the 3 partners work together in Boston before we kind of get into the example that we'll be hearing about?
I think you basically covered it. I think one thing we were grateful for was that we had a chance to develop trust and collaboration in person that really helped carry us as the project changed dramatically once the pandemic hit. But I'll let you go into the different stages.
Thank you for bringing that forward. Obviously, if you have a program based on dialogue and deliberation, it was definitely changed quite a bit through the experience of the pandemic, as I know has happened for many of you. So really quickly, just to say that we proposed kind of a model for co-creation that was based on 3 steps for public participation that were identified in this publication you may have seen before from Rowan Frewer. They said that if you really wanted to do community involvement that was bidirectional, the public should be involved in these 3 things they talked about: agenda setting, decision making, and policy forming. But they didn't actually say what those were. So we felt that for informal science education, maybe there would be 4 main steps that fit into these categories to center our work. And they were a welcome event, a topic selection workshop, a deliberative forum event, and a forum and an event focused on disseminating to policymakers and amplifying through communities. And so we came up with this basic framework, and each step of the way in each of the locations, there's a group of partners working together from those perspectives to ensure that community voices were heard, but also that this could be engaging for the public and could meet the needs of policymakers who are trying to think about what to do. So we're very quickly, in just about 2 minutes, going to sort of go through the event milestones of this model. I'll talk about what it was intended to do, and then Caitlin will share some perspectives as somebody who put this into practice and what she and other members of the Boston team learned along the way. So the first part, and she talked about a little bit about this, was a welcome event, and this is kind of topic agnostic. The idea was just to give the team an opportunity to meet the community members and collect informal and formal data about ideas that were important to them and their community to start informing potential topics that can be a resource to the teams during the topic selection phase. And so you can see an event here at the Urban College of Boston in which people were sharing ideas with each other and just coming up with ideas that they would like to see talked about if we were going to do this. And I'll turn it over to Caitlin just to talk a little bit about anything she took from the experience of the welcome event.
Great. So just kind of identifying the opportunity presented by this, it was obviously to engage this multilingual group of adult learners, many of whom were parents, Boston residents, and not yet connected with the Museum of Science. And it provided an opportunity for our students to connect with local policymakers and representatives from the museum and really be a part of this project from the inception, which they were really excited about and were eager to see how the project unfolded. Some challenges are flagged on this slide, but obviously, as others have mentioned, the additional time. In our case, some of it was time for translation, interpretation, making sure that data collected in multiple languages was all translated and included, and kind of that need to provide enough detail about the museum and the project up front, but without being confusing or overwhelming.
Thanks,
back over to you,
Caitlin.
David.
Martin says that we're almost out of time, if not out, so we'll go quickly. The next step is a topic selection workshop, and this is really where we brought people together to spend a day thinking about what topic was prioritized. So participants thought together and deliberated about 3 ideas that had been identified: housing, economy, jobs, and education. Caitlin, anything you want to say about this process for the workshop?
I think this piece was just making sure we really introduced everyone in the role and made sure that everyone at the table, regardless of their perspective, felt that they were an equally valued part of this topic selection workshop. So we learned a lot throughout that process.
Thank you so much. I promise you we're getting to the end here. And so this culminated in a forum event. And for all 4 teams, obviously this was very different than it was anticipated. In the case of the Boston team, they focused on space use and housing innovation in the greater Boston area. And the team had been scheduled to do their in-person forum after a year of work in March of 2020. So obviously the pivot to virtual was pretty radical. We used an asynchronous platform called Consider It that brought some of the ideas that we wanted to give participants a chance to think about the perspectives of stakeholders and share their feelings and priorities about proposed policy directions for housing innovation. Caitlin, anything you want to say about this, knowing that you had to pivot to virtual and that was a tough pivot for us?
I think, like the other groups, our community of students was among those most impacted by the pandemic in Boston. And I think, it limited their ability to engage in the remote forum, and then it informed how we thought about the final step, the policy forming event, to try to make it more engaging and more accessible as the pandemic unfolded.
That's great. Okay, so I think we need to wrap up. So I'll just say that the final step that's really still being worked out is a policy forming event. And this has been the most challenging piece. We've really kind of just put forward an idea where the policy forming deliverable has been something that each team can create to meet their community's needs. And I think the biggest takeaway from this is that it really needs to begin from the beginning and understood by all of the groups, but that policy priorities can change, and that can make things really challenging. There was a global pandemic and a huge social upheaval that took some of the teams away from the ideas that they were thinking about and allowed us to do this. So I'll just stop and say I want to thank all of the partners. In the breakouts we can talk more about this, but this has been unfolding in all of these different communities, and I'll turn it back over to our organizers. Thanks. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you, everybody. What great presentations. So before you get sent to your breakouts, I'm just going to touch base on some of the things that were raised. In demonstrating the powerful impact that one can have on communities through this community-based research work is really impressive. And I think that each of the 3 presentations really pointed to directions that as models for what can be achieved in the field by doing this. And one of the things that really struck me was is that being slow about it. I was really impressed with that. You have to settle down and take time to make a difference in the communities, to have them get to know them, to know you, and to also to uncover some of the issues that are really going on in a community and to work with them. And I think that's really powerful when you think of the community being first in the research process. And so beginning with the community first was pretty powerful, I thought, and that the equity is kind of embedded in that if you look, that when you treat people with respect by honoring their community, that's where the equity issues start to come in and get resolved. So I thought that was also pretty impactful.